Some encounters seem destined by fate, and some love stories are written in the most unexpected moments. When a determined single mother with burning dreams for her young son crosses paths with a widowed CEO carrying the weight of losing his child, they find in each other not just love, but a chance for healing and new beginnings. A chance meeting in an elevator unfolds into a powerful narrative about overcoming social prejudices, confronting past trauma, and having the courage to embrace happiness, even when the world seems to stand against you. This is more than just a love story. It's a testament to faith, to the courage to love again, and most importantly, proof that true love can transform pain into hope, loss into legacy, and broken individuals into a complete family. In a world where cynicism often overshadows romance, Grace and Edward's story reminds us that authentic connections can still flourish in the most unlikely places. Let their journey remind us that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from what we thought were painful endings, and that love, when it's with the right person at the right time, has the power to heal all wounds and create something truly miraculous. This isn't just about finding love, it's about rediscovering hope, rebuilding lives, and believing that second chances can lead to first-class happiness. Life hadn't been kind to Grace Thompson, but her spirit remained unbroken. At 28, this single mother worked as a barista at the Morning Brew, a cozy coffee shop nestled in the heart of Boston. Despite holding a bachelor's degree in business administration from Boston University, Grace found herself serving lattes instead of pursuing her corporate dreams. "Noah, sweetie, time for breakfast," Grace called out every morning at 6 a.m., her voice carrying through their small 2-bedroom apartment. Her 4-year-old son Noah would stumble out of bed, rubbing his sleepy eyes, clutching his favorite dinosaur plushie. His frequent health issues meant regular doctor visits, but his bright smile never dimmed, even on the toughest days. "Mommy, I made this for you." Noah proudly presented his latest crayon masterpiece, a stick figure wearing a cape with the wobbly words, "My mom is my superhero," scrawled across the top. Grace carefully pinned it to their refrigerator, right next to his other artistic creations, fighting back tears as she served him the last of their cereal. 3 years ago, Grace's life had taken an unexpected turn. She was on track to start her dream job at a prestigious consulting firm when she discovered she was pregnant. The news sent her then-boyfriend, James, running for the hills, leaving nothing but a hastily written note and blocked phone number. Complications during pregnancy forced her to decline the job offer, and after Noah's birth, finding work in her field became increasingly challenging. "We don't have enough experience for entry-level positions," they'd say, or "our hours aren't flexible enough for single parents." The corporate world she'd prepared for during 4 years of college seemed to slam its doors shut, one rejection letter at a time. The coffee shop job wasn't ideal, but manager Sarah's understanding of Grace's situation made it workable. Split shifts allowed Grace to drop Noah at daycare and pick him up without paying for extra childcare they couldn't afford. The tips helped cover groceries, and the free day-old pastries meant Noah never went to bed hungry, even if Grace often did. "Ms. Thompson, Noah's medical bills are past due again," the pediatrician's office would call monthly. Grace would juggle bills, paying just enough to keep the lights on and Noah's asthma medication filled. Her own student loans sat in forbearance, the interest mounting like a shadow over her future. But now a glimmer of hope had appeared. While serving coffee to a regular customer who worked at Hayes Biotech, Grace learned about an administrative assistant position. The company was known for its groundbreaking medical research and employee-friendly policies. The starting salary was triple what she made at the coffee shop, and most importantly, it offered comprehensive health insurance. "You should apply, Grace," her customer had insisted, sliding over the job posting. "They value potential over experience, and your degree would definitely catch their attention." That night, after tucking Noah into bed, Grace spent hours polishing her resume and crafting the perfect cover letter. Her hands trembled as she submitted the application online, praying this could be their chance for a better life. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. "Dear Ms. Thompson, We are pleased to invite you for an interview. The morning of the interview, Grace stood before her mirror, wearing her only business suit, a navy ensemble from her college graduation, thankfully still fitting. She'd traded shifts with coworkers to get the morning off and arranged for Sarah to pick up Noah from daycare if the interview ran long. "Remember, baby," she whispered to her reflection, "this isn't just about you. This is for Noah, for a better future, for everything he deserves." Little did Grace know that stepping into Hayes Biotech's gleaming office tower that morning would change not just her career prospects, but her entire life. The universe had plans that went far beyond a simple job interview, starting with a chance encounter in an elevator with Edward Hayes himself, though she wouldn't know who he was until much later. Grace rushed through the imposing glass doors of Hayes Biotech's headquarters, her heart pounding against her ribs. The morning had already thrown her a curveball. Noah's asthma had acted up, requiring an emergency nebulizer treatment before school. Now, with just 5 minutes until her interview, she found herself speed-walking across the marble lobby, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Hold the elevator, please," she called out, seeing the doors begin to close. A hand shot out, catching the door just in time. Grace hurried inside, slightly out of breath. "Thank you, I really appreciate—" Her words trailed off as she looked up at her elevator companion. The man before her stood tall in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding yet somehow gentle. Despite his obvious wealth, suggested by his Patek Philippe watch and Italian leather briefcase, there was a weariness in his steel blue eyes that spoke of hidden sorrows. "Rough morning?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised her. Edward Hayes, though Grace didn't know it was him, offered a kind smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Is it that obvious?" Grace attempted to smooth her slightly wind-blown hair. "My son had an asthma attack this morning, and I'm already running late for a job interview that could change our lives. And—" She stopped herself, realizing she was oversharing with a stranger. Just then, the elevator shuddered to a halt between the 15th and 16th floors. The lights flickered ominously before stabilizing, leaving them trapped in the suspended box. "You've got to be kidding me," Grace whispered, panic rising in her throat. "This couldn't be happening, not today, of all days." "Don't worry," her companion said, pressing the emergency button. "The building's maintenance team is excellent, though I have to admit, this isn't how I planned to start my morning either." He loosened his tie slightly and leaned against the wall. "Since we might be here for a while, I'm Edward." "Grace," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Grace Thompson." "Well, Grace Thompson, would you like to hear about my first elevator mishap? It might help take your mind off things." Without waiting for her response, Edward launched into a story about getting stuck in an elevator on his first day of college, wearing nothing but a towel and flip-flops after swimming practice. Despite her anxiety, Grace found herself laughing. There was something disarming about this man, the way he could turn an awkward situation into a moment of genuine connection. "Your turn," he prompted. "Tell me about this life-changing interview." Grace hesitated for a moment before deciding she had nothing to lose. She told him about Noah, about her struggle to find meaningful work that would accommodate single parenthood, about her dreams of providing a better life for her son. "I have a business degree from Boston University," she explained, "but life took an unexpected turn. Now I'm serving coffee, watching my student loans pile up, and hoping this interview might be my second chance." Edward listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said after a moment, "some of the most valuable employees I've ever known were people who took unexpected paths. Life experience often teaches more than any degree can." "That's kind of you to say," Grace smiled, "though I'm not sure the interviewer will see it that way." "You'd be surprised," Edward replied cryptically, a slight smile playing at his lips. The elevator suddenly hummed back to life, and Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. As they began moving again, Edward checked his watch. "What floor is your interview on?" he asked. 22nd, Grace replied, her anxiety returning as she realized how late she now was. "Don't worry about the time," Edward assured her. I have a feeling they'll understand the circumstances. When the elevator reached the 22nd floor, Grace stepped out, turning back briefly. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for making a stressful situation much less terrible." "Good luck, Grace," Edward replied, his eyes twinkling, "though I don't think you'll need it." As Grace hurried toward the reception desk, she had no idea that the man she'd just spent 30 minutes talking to was Edward Hayes, CEO of Hayes Biotech, and that he was already rewriting the morning's interview schedule in his mind. Behind her, Edward watched her go, impressed by her resilience and authenticity. In those 30 minutes, he'd seen something rare, someone who, despite life's hardships, maintained both their dignity and their humanity. It reminded him of his late wife, Sarah, and the strength she'd shown during their daughter's illness. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick message to his assistant. "Clear my morning schedule. I'll be conducting Ms. Thompson's interview personally." The elevator doors closed, and Edward straightened his tie, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time in months. Sometimes, he thought, the best things in life happen when you least expect them, even in a broken elevator. Grace sat in the elegant waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The receptionist had been surprisingly understanding about her tardiness, mentioning something about technical difficulties and asking her to wait momentarily. The wall clock ticked past her scheduled interview time, each minute increasing her anxiety. "Mr. Thompson," a polished assistant appeared, tablet in hand. "Mr. Hayes will see you now." "Mr. Hayes?" Grace's voice wavered slightly. "I thought I was meeting with HR?" "There's been a slight change in the schedule," the assistant explained, leading her down a corridor lined with abstract art. "The CEO has personally requested to conduct your interview." Grace's heart nearly stopped when they reached the corner office. Through the glass doors, she could see her elevator companion settling behind a massive desk. The nameplate read, "Edward Hayes, Chief Executive Officer." "Please, come in, Grace," Edward called out, gesturing to the chair across from him. His warm smile did little to calm her racing thoughts. You're Edward Hayes," she managed, sinking into the offered seat. "I had no idea." "Would you have told me your story so honestly if you had known?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Grace took a deep breath, straightening her spine. "Yes, actually, I would have. Everything I said was true, and I'm not ashamed of my journey." Edward's smile widened. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." He opened a folder on his desk, her resume. "Your academic credentials are impressive, but what interests me more is everything that's not on this paper. Tell me, how has managing a coffee shop's morning rush prepared you for corporate life?" For the next hour, they engaged in a conversation that felt more like a meaningful exchange than a formal interview. Grace spoke about juggling customer demands while maintaining quality service, about managing inventory with tight budgets, and about building relationships with regular customers. "You know," Edward interjected, "the position you applied for, administrative assistant, it's not quite right for you." Grace's heart sank, but before she could respond, he continued. "I have a different role in mind. We're launching a new community outreach program focusing on medical assistance for underprivileged children. Given your personal experience with Noah's health challenges and your business background, I believe you'd be perfect as our program coordinator." Grace blinked in surprise. That's several levels above what I applied for." "The salary would be significantly higher too," Edward added, sliding a paper across the desk. Grace's eyes widened at the figure. It was more than enough to cover Noah's medical bills and move them to a better apartment. "Well," she asked quietly, "why take this chance on me?" Edward stood, walking to the window overlooking the city. "In 30 minutes, stuck in an elevator, you showed more genuine compassion, resilience, and business acumen than many executives I've known for years. You spoke about your challenges without self-pity, and your dreams without entitlement. That's rare." He turned back to face her. "Plus, you made me laugh for the first time in months, Not many people can do that anymore. Grace noticed the sadness that flickered across his face, remembering the rumors she'd heard about the tragic loss of his wife and daughter. The position would require some evening events, Edward continued, but we have an on-site daycare center for employees' children, with full medical staff aware of conditions like asthma. Grace felt tears threatening to form. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline, a chance to use both her education and her life experience to make a difference. I should warn you, she said, finding her voice. I'm not the type to accept charity. If I take this position, I'll work harder than anyone to prove I deserve it. Edward's response was immediate and firm. That's exactly why I'm offering it to you. This isn't charity, Grace. This is recognition of potential. The question is, are you ready to take this leap? Grace thought about Noah, about his brave smile during asthma treatments, about his crayon drawings of superheroes. She thought about the countless nights she'd stayed up, wondering if she'd ever find a way to give him the life he deserved. Yes, she said firmly, extending her hand. Yes, I am. Edward shook her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Welcome to Hayes Biotech, Grace. I have a feeling this is the beginning of something extraordinary. As Grace left the office that morning, clutching her offer letter, she felt like she was floating. In the elevator ride down, a working elevator this time, she allowed herself to cry tears of joy and relief. Sometimes, she realized, life's biggest challenges lead to its greatest opportunities. What she didn't know yet was that this was more than just a career change. It was the first chapter of a story that would transform not only her life and Noah's, but Edward's as well. The first few weeks at Hayes Biotech passed in a whirlwind of activity. Grace threw herself into her new role with determination, quickly proving Edward's faith in her was well placed. The community outreach program began taking shape under her guidance, with initiatives that showed both heart and business acumen. One evening, as the office grew quiet and the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Grace was finalizing proposals for a pediatric assistance program. She hadn't noticed the time until a gentle knock on her office door startled her. "You're still here?" Edward stood in the doorway, his tie loosened and jacket draped over his arm. "It's past 7. "Oh," Grace checked her watch, alarmed. "Noah's at the daycare center. I lost track of time working on these proposals." "I'm heading down to pick up some documents. Let me walk with you," Edward offered. As they walked through the quiet corridors, Edward glanced at the papers in her hand. "Those proposals look comprehensive." "I've been thinking about families like mine," Grace explained. "Parents who have to choose between buying groceries or paying for their child's medication. No one should have to make that choice." Edward's expression softened. "You speak from experience." "Yes," Grace admitted. "There were nights I'd go to bed hungry so Noah could have his medicine. But we were lucky, at least. I had a job. Some families don't even have that." They reached the daycare center, where Noah was the last child remaining. His face lit up when he saw them. "Mommy and Mr. Edward!" "Hey, buddy," Edward smiled, kneeling to Noah's level. "What's that you're drawing?" "It's a superhero family," Noah proudly held up his artwork. "See? That's Mommy, that's me, and that's you. You're all wearing capes." Grace felt her cheeks flush, but Edward seemed touched. "A superhero family, huh? That's quite an honor." As they walked toward the parking garage, Noah chattering about his day, Edward made an unexpected suggestion. "Have you had dinner? There's a great family restaurant just around the corner." Grace hesitated, conscious of crossing professional boundaries, but Noah's eager face made the decision for her. "Please, Mommy? Mr. Edward tells the best stories." Over plates of pasta and garlic bread, the conversation flowed naturally. Edward told stories that had Noah giggling, and Grace found herself relaxing, seeing a different side of her usually serious boss. As Noah focused on his dessert, the conversation turned more personal. "You're doing an amazing job with him," Edward observed softly. "He's a remarkable kid." "Thank you," Grace smiled. He makes it easy to keep going, even when things get tough." Edward was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a lower voice. "I had a daughter, Charlotte. She would have been 8 this year." Grace's heart tightened. "I'm so sorry, Edward. Would you like to tell me about her?" For the first time, Edward opened up about his loss. He spoke about Charlotte's battle with a rare genetic disorder, about the helplessness he felt watching his daughter slip away, about losing his wife, Sarah, to depression shortly after. His voice cracked slightly as he described Charlotte's love for drawing, just like Noah. "That's why this pediatric program means so much to me," he admitted. "If we can help even one family avoid what we went through." Without thinking, Grace reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The touch lasted only a moment, but it conveyed more understanding than words could express. Over the following weeks, their relationship evolved naturally. Edward began stopping by Grace's office more frequently, not just to discuss work, but to share coffee and conversation. He attended Noah's preschool art show, standing proudly beside Grace as Noah explained his masterpieces. Grace found herself looking forward to their interactions while trying to maintain professional boundaries. One rainy evening, after a particularly successful presentation to the board, Edward invited Grace to his office to celebrate with a cup of coffee. "You know," he said, looking out at the rain-streaked windows, "I haven't felt this alive in years. The way you've brought this program to life, how you've helped me see purpose again." "Edward," Grace began carefully, "I need to be honest. I'm starting to feel something here, and it scares me. Not just because you're my boss, but because I have Noah to think about. I can't risk his stability or happiness." Edward turned to face her, his expression serious but gentle. "Grace, I understand your concerns. I have them too. But I also know that sometimes life gives us second chances, and we have to be brave enough to take them." Just then, Noah burst into the office, having escaped from the daycare center. "Mommy, Mr. Edward, look what I made." He held up another drawing, this time of the 3 of them having a picnic under a rainbow. Looking at Noah's innocent hope, at Edward's gentle smile, and feeling her own heart's quiet certainty, Grace realized that sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we build along the way. As they stood there, looking at Noah's drawing, the rain continuing to fall outside, Grace felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew that this moment marked the beginning of something beautiful, not just for her, but for all 3 of them. The evening ended with a promise to take things slowly, to be mindful of both their professional relationship and Noah's feelings. But as Grace drove home that night, Noah sleeping peacefully in the back seat, she couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with grand gestures or fairy tale meetings, but with broken elevators, honest conversations, and the courage to open your heart to new possibilities. The whispers started subtly at first. A few raised eyebrows in the break room, hushed conversations that stopped when Grace entered, and pointed glances when Edward visited her office. Despite their attempts to maintain professionalism, their growing closeness hadn't gone unnoticed. Victoria Chen, the marketing director who had been vying for Edward's attention for years, became the catalyst for office drama. One morning, Grace arrived to find an anonymous email circulating throughout the company. "Notice: How to sleep your way to the top at Hayes Biotech, a single mother's guide to success." Grace's hands trembled as she read the cruel implications about her relationship with Edward and her rapid rise within the company. The attachment included photos of their dinner outings with Noah, carefully angled to look like intimate dates, and screenshots of their late-night office meetings. "I heard she deliberately got stuck in that elevator with him," one colleague whispered loud enough for Grace to hear as she passed the coffee station. "Poor Mr. Hayes probably feels sorry for her and that sick kid of hers," another added. The professional reputation she'd worked so hard to build was being dismantled by office gossip. Even worse, some of her program proposals were now being questioned, with suggestions that they'd only been approved because of her special relationship with the CEO. Edward, upon learning of the situation, was furious. "I'll call an immediate staff meeting," he declared, storming into Grace's office. "This stops now." "No," Grace said firmly, though her voice quivered slightly. "That would only make things worse. I need to handle this on my own merit." But the situation escalated when Noah's daycare teacher pulled Grace aside one afternoon. "Some parents have expressed concerns about Noah's preferential treatment," she explained uncomfortably. "They're questioning whether it's appropriate for him to spend so much time with Mr. Hayes." That evening, Grace made the painful decision to create some distance. She began declining Edward's lunch invitations, scheduling meetings through his assistant rather than directly, and making sure they were never alone together at the office. "Mommy, why doesn't Mr. Edward come to read me stories anymore?" Noah asked one night, clutching his favorite book that Edward had given him. "Did he stop liking us?" Grace's heart broke at her son's confused expression. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to make hard decisions to protect the people they care about." Edward tried to respect her wishes, but she could see the pain in his eyes whenever they passed each other in the hallway. The warmth that had begun to fill both their lives was replaced by a professional coldness that felt like winter. The breaking point came during a crucial board meeting. Victoria Chen presented a counter-proposal to Grace's pediatric program, suggesting it was too emotionally driven and lacking objective business merit. Grace watched as months of her hard work was picked apart, her passion project reduced to suspicious implications about her motivations. She maintained her composure, professionally defending each point with data and research, but inside she was crumbling. After the meeting, Edward found her in her office, packing her things. "I'm submitting my resignation," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "This program needs to succeed, and it won't as long as my involvement taints its reputation." "Grace, please." Edward stepped closer, his voice urgent. "Don't let them win. What we're doing here matters. What we have matters." "Does it?" She turned to face him, tears finally spilling. "Because right now, my son is confused and hurt, my professional reputation is in shambles, and the program that could help thousands of children might fail because people think I earned my position on my back rather than my merit." "Then let me fix this," Edward pleaded. "Let me tell them the truth, that I'm in love with you, not because you're my employee, but because you showed me how to live again. That watching you with Noah helped heal the wound Charlotte's loss left in my heart." Grace froze, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. "You're in love with me?" "Desperately," he admitted. "But I've been afraid, too. Afraid of losing you like I lost Sarah and Charlotte. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of hoping for happiness again." Just then, Noah burst into the office, his face streaked with tears. He'd overheard some older kids at daycare talking about his mom and Mr. Edward. "Why are people being mean to you, Mommy?" he sobbed. "Is it because of me? Because I'm sick sometimes?" Grace and Edward exchanged a look, both realizing that their attempts to protect Noah had actually hurt him more. Edward knelt down to Noah's level. "No, buddy, it's not because of you. It's because sometimes grown-ups forget what's really important. They forget that love and kindness matter more than what other people think." Grace watched as Noah threw his arms around Edward's neck, and something shifted in her heart. She'd been so focused on protecting them from gossip that she'd forgotten to protect what truly mattered, their happiness. "I'm not resigning," she announced firmly, "but we need to handle this differently. No more hiding, no more distance. We face this together as a family." Edward stood, keeping one arm around Noah while reaching for Grace's hand with the other. "Together," he agreed. The challenges weren't over. There would still be gossip to face, professional boundaries to navigate, and healing to be done. But as they stood there, the three of them, united against the world's judgment, Grace realized that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. And sometimes the family you choose is worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else might say. The next morning, Edward called an emergency company-wide meeting. The grand conference room was packed, with tension thick in the air, as employees filed in. Grace sat in the front row, her head held high despite the whispers around her. Edward stood at the podium, his presence commanding immediate silence. But instead of his usual business demeanor, he carried himself with a different kind of authority, one born from personal truth. 3 years ago, he began, his voice steady but emotional, I lost my daughter Charlotte to a rare genetic disorder. 6 months later, I lost my wife Sarah to depression. I buried myself in work, believing that success could fill the void they left behind. I was wrong. The room remained absolutely still as he continued. Then, by what some might call fate or coincidence, I got stuck in an elevator with a remarkable woman who didn't know who I was. She shared her story of struggle and determination, not to gain favor, but because she saw another human being who needed connection. That woman was Grace Thompson. Edward's eyes met Grace's, drawing strength from her presence. Since then, I've watched her transform our community outreach program with brilliance and compassion. I've seen her work late hours not for recognition, but because she believes in helping families who face the same challenges she overcame. And yes, I fell in love with her, not because she was my employee, but because she showed me how to live again. He paused, scanning the room. I'm aware of the rumors and emails circulating about Ms. Thompson's character and qualifications. Let me be clear, any further attempts to undermine her professional reputation will be treated as harassment and dealt with accordingly. Victoria Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as Edward continued. But, more importantly, I want to address the culture that allows such behavior to thrive. When did we become so cynical that we can't recognize genuine love and respect? When did we decide that someone's personal happiness threatens their professional competence? Grace stood up, walking to join Edward at the podium. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. I considered hiding our relationship, Grace addressed the room. I considered leaving a job I love and a program I believe in because of fear and judgment. But then I realized, what lesson would that teach my son? That love is something to be ashamed of? That we should sacrifice happiness for appearances? She squared her shoulders, her voice growing stronger. I earned my position through hard work, dedication, and qualification. My relationship with Edward developed separately from and after my professional achievements. I won't apologize for finding love, but I will continue to prove through my work that I deserve every opportunity I've been given. Edward stepped forward again. Moving forward, Grace will report directly to the board of directors to maintain professional objectivity. The community outreach program will continue under her leadership with expanded funding and support. He turned to face the employees directly. We're not just a company, we're a community, and communities thrive when we support each other's growth and happiness, not tear each other down with speculation and judgment. The silence that followed was broken by slow, building applause. It started with a few brave souls and spread until the entire room was standing, many with tears in their eyes. Even Victoria Chen, though reluctantly, joined in. As the meeting dispersed, several employees approached Grace to apologize for their part in spreading rumors. Others shared their own stories of workplace relationships that had blossomed into beautiful marriages. Later that evening, in Edward's office, Grace finally let her tears fall, not from sadness, but from relief and overwhelming love. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Going public changes everything." Edward pulled her close. "I've never been more sure of anything. Well, except for one thing." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small box. Inside was a delicate ring with 3 stones, a large diamond flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. "The sapphires," he explained, his voice thick with emotion, "represent Charlotte and Noah, because this isn't just about us, it's about building a family together." Before he could formally ask, Noah burst into the office, his timing as always impeccable. "Did you ask her yet?" he exclaimed. "Can I call you Dad now?" Grace looked between her son and Edward, her heart full to bursting. "You knew about this?" Noah grinned. "Mr. Edward asked for my permission first. I said yes, but only if he promises to always read me bedtime stories." Through tears and laughter, Grace nodded her answer, and Edward slipped the ring onto her finger. As the three of them embraced, she realized that sometimes the greatest acts of courage aren't facing external challenges, but allowing yourself to be truly, completely happy. The truth had set them free, and love had given them wings. The Hayes Biotech building looked different in the warm summer sunset, its glass windows reflecting golden light across the renovated children's wing of the adjacent hospital. Inside one of the patient rooms, Grace Hayes adjusted a young girl's IV while her mother watched gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you," the mother whispered. "Without this program, we couldn't have afforded Sarah's treatment." Grace smiled, touching the 3-stone ring on her finger. "That's exactly why we created this program. No parent should have to choose between their child's health and putting food on the table." The Charlotte Hayes Memorial Pediatric Wing, now in its first year of operation, had already helped hundreds of families access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. The program had become a model for corporate social responsibility, with other companies seeking to replicate its success. Walking through the corridor, Grace passed the wall of photographs children who had been helped by the program, their smiling faces a testament to hope and healing. In the center was a portrait of Charlotte, her bright eyes seeming to watch over the children who came after her. "Mrs. Hayes," a nurse called out, "your husband and son are waiting in the garden." The hospital garden had been Noah's idea, a place where sick children could play and forget about their illness for a while. Grace found Edward and Noah planting new flowers, their hands dirty and their faces happy. "Mom," Noah, now 8, ran to hug her. "Dad's teaching me about Charlotte's favorite flowers. We're planting them for her birthday tomorrow." Edward stood, brushing dirt from his knees. The past year had softened him, replacing his corporate armor with genuine warmth. He wrapped an arm around Grace's waist, placing a gentle hand on her growing belly. "How are my girls doing today?" he asked, referring to Grace and their unborn daughter. "We're perfect," Grace smiled, "though your daughter seems to think my ribs make excellent dance floor." They watched as Noah carefully arranged purple irises, Charlotte's favorites, in a heart shape. The boy who had once been so fragile was now thriving, his own health challenges managed through the very program his mother had helped create. Victoria Chen, who had undergone her own journey of growth, approached them with a stack of reports. After the confrontation a year ago, she had surprised everyone by asking to work directly with the pediatric program, eventually becoming one of its strongest advocates. "The quarterly numbers are in," she announced proudly. "We've exceeded all projections. The board is recommending expanding the program to 3 more cities." Edward squeezed Grace's hand. "Charlotte would have loved this. All of it." "She does love it," Noah stated matter-of-factly in the way children often speak truth. "She's here in all the flowers and smiles and getting better, kids." Grace felt tears well up, pregnancy hormones she'd claim later as she looked at her family. Edward, who had learned to love again after devastating loss, Noah, who had taught them all about resilience and joy, the baby girl growing inside her who would know both Charlotte's story and her legacy of love. And herself, the woman who had once felt so out of place in the corporate world, now standing confidently as both a successful executive and a loving wife and mother. Later that evening, as they prepared for Charlotte's birthday celebration the next day, Grace found Edward in his home office, looking at old photographs. "Having second thoughts about tomorrow's celebration?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Just remembering. But it's different now. The memories don't hurt like they used to. They feel more like guidance." Grace understood. Charlotte's birthday had become not just a memorial, but a celebration of life and hope, marked by the release of purple balloons and the awarding of new medical scholarships in her name. "You know what Charlotte would love most?" Grace said, sitting beside him. that her story didn't end with goodbye. It became a beginning. For the program, for us, for all the families we help. Edward pulled her close, his hand finding its way to her belly where their daughter kicked in response. "Love multiplies," he murmured. "It doesn't." Noah appeared in the doorway, carrying the family photo album they'd been building together. It told their story from that first elevator meeting through their wedding, the program's success, and now their growing family. But more than that, it told a story of healing, of second chances, and of love's ability to transform loss into legacy. "Can we add tomorrow's pictures to our story?" Noah asked, climbing between them. "Of course," Grace answered, making room for him. "Our story is still being written." And as they sat there together, planning tomorrow's celebration of a little girl whose love continued to change lives, Grace realized that the best endings aren't really endings at all. They're new beginnings, wrapped in hope and sealed with love.